Welcome to Decode. Have you ever had a déjà vu? You know, one of those strange moments where everything feels familiar even though it shouldn't? You look around, you're in a place and you feel, wait, I've lived this moment before. I've been here before. This happened to me actually. 25 years ago, I was on my first trip to Hong Kong in China, and I actually was walking around the promenade thinking, you know what? I know this place. But you know the most interesting thing? I had never been to China. So what is it? Is it some sort of a brain glitch? Or is it something else? Is it a small echo of another experience, of another run on that same moment, maybe in a different life, maybe in our own life in a different moment? Some scientists, philosophers, and even tech billionaires believe that we may actually be living inside a simulation, and that these déjà vus are actually a way for us to get a glimpse of what's outside. If that is true, if reality is not really real, who's running it? And more importantly, why? Stay with me until the end, because today I'm going to share all the science and all the knowledge and the data about the simulation hypothesis. This idea that we may be, after all, living inside a simulation. So today, in Decode, is reality real? Let's begin today's journey with a little bit of history. Long before computers, long before science even had a name, humans were already doubting about the nature of reality. We have always had this strange intuition that what we can see, what we can touch, and what we can feel may not be all there is. The first recorded version of this was actually stated by the Greek philosopher Plato. If you remember, he imagined mankind to be a group of people chained inside a cave. And of course, they cannot get out of the cave. So they spend their entire life actually watching shadows projected on the wall of the cave. And they believe that those shadows were actually the real world. But then in the story, one of these men actually manages to break free. And of course, he steps outside of the cave to experience reality. And he's the one who sees sunlight and who sees reality for the first time. And of course, he realizes that everything that they had been seeing before, everything they thought was real, was only a projection, a reflection of something deeper, something hidden to us. Plato used this as a metaphor of knowledge and about the discovery of knowledge, but it's actually the first recorded version of what we call in the 21st century the simulation hypothesis. This hypothesis that we may be living inside a simulation. The only thing is that poor Plato had to call this philosophy. Now we move forward a little bit and we can see in ancient India, same thing. The Hindu thinkers, they called the material world Maya, which is the Sanskrit word for illusion. And they believed that there was a veil that was hiding the ultimate reality behind it, behind this veil. They believe our senses were actually deceiving us and we were trapped in some sort of like a divine realm. And the only way to actually see the ultimate reality was enlightenment that happened when we woke up from this state of dream. And talking about dream, centuries later, in my country, in my hometown, in Spain, in 17th century, there was a playwright called Calderón de la Barca. And he wrote a very famous theater play called La vida es sueño, which means life is dream. In La vida es sueño, it tells the story of a prince who has been locked away at birth. And when he's finally released, he experiences a world that he doesn't understand because he has been locked all his life. A world that feels too perfect, too staged, and if he feels that this world may vanish at any second. And then when he wakes up, he discovers that his entire life was actually a dream. So as you can see, this message that we may be inside a dream, inside a simulation, inside a cave, is actually timeless. Reality may be less solid than it appears to all of us. And the world that we see could actually be some sort of a form of theater put forward by somebody. Let's call him a creator or a programmer, whatever you want to call it. A projection, a temporary illusion, a story that we are meant to play out. So long before computers, we were already haunted by the same question, which is, what if everything that we call real was just shadows on the wall? But then, of course, the 20th century arrives, and with it arrive computers. And this idea of the dream, this idea of the projection, it actually becomes bits and it becomes pixels. One day, somebody actually began building a machine that could actually create worlds. We call this the computer. And I know this really well because it has been my job for more than 20 years to actually build video games, which, if you think about it, are fantasy worlds. So for the first time in history, where humans were not just describing reality, because if you think about, novelists, and if you think about painters, they were basically describing some sort of reality, but basically we were able to create realities. Alan Turing, one of the fathers of computer science, he proved that any process that you can describe with clear rules, whether mathematics, or even human thought, could, in theory, be reproduced by a machine, by a computer program. He called this the universal machine. And it didn't matter what you were trying to simulate. If you had enough time and enough memory at your disposal, that machine could imitate the logic of anything. This idea, the idea that we could have a machine simulating a world, for example, of course, it changed everything. Soon after, it was John von Neumann, who's another of the fathers of computation, who took it even further. He showed how simple lines of code, with little yes-no decisions and ifs and loops and the typical constructs of a programming language, could actually evolve into systems that could behave like life itself. With tiny rules, you could create huge complexity. Let me give you a very, very simple example that all of us can understand. The game of Tetris. How many rules do you need to describe Tetris? 5, 6. You can move a block to the left, you can move a block to the right, you can make it turn. There's this many types of blocks, and blocks basically overlap vertically with each other. And if a line is full, we basically destroy the line. These are the rules of Tetris, right? I'm a game designer, that's what I do. And yeah, you can describe Tetris with 6 rules. Now think of the billions of combinations of different boards that you can do with Tetris. You see, John von Neumann proved that with very few rules, we could actually generate huge complexity. That's something we have also seen, for example, in games like chess, to name an example, right? So that we could actually create a miniature creation, a miniature Genesis, written in binary code, because a finite program could actually create an infinite world. And so once that door was opened by, Alan Turing and John von Neumann, of course, philosophy walked in, and thinkers began thinking, what is the future of humanity now that a machine can actually simulate a full world? Decades later, it was the Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom who actually turned Turing's logic to its final consequence. And he said, imagine a civilization that is actually advanced enough to simulate life, conscious beings. Can we, with a computer today, simulate a life being? Sure, we can. So Bostrom said, imagine we reach that stage, that we can have complete self-aware minds living inside digital worlds. If you did this, why would you stop with one? No, maybe you would do many, right? Because once you can simulate a being, an animal, a creature inside a computer, most likely you would simulate many, because now you have the tool at your disposal. So why not do millions of those? And so what Bostrom proposes, which is very provocative, is if we are really able to simulate millions of realities inside computers, basically the number of simulated realities would outnumber the real reality, the real universe, because there's many more simulated realities than real realities. So from a statistical standpoint, basically the probabilities of us being inside a simulation are actually much higher than the probability of us being inside reality. You see, the argument is really compelling. Again, it's the moment you're able to simulate a reality, and the moment you can do many of those, from a pure probabilistic standpoint, chances are we are inside a simulation, not inside reality. Because if there's billions of simulations and just one reality, who tells you that we're lucky enough to be in the real reality and not inside one of those simulations? Again, it's a little bit sci-fi, but it's an interesting thought. That could be us, living inside one computer, just not being aware of so. That's Nick Bostrom's argument, and it's called logic. It's not really science fiction. It's a serious philosophical paper that actually deserves thinking, which is, if we have simulations, and we have many of those, who tells us that we are not inside one of those? And that shook the foundations of modern science, because it actually implies something extraordinary, which is, if we can imagine building a digital universe, maybe somebody has already done it, and we are inside that simulated universe. So, of course, once we prove that computers can simulate worlds, the media jumps into that bandwagon, because that becomes a very interesting plot device, a very interesting story construct, and cinema has made this idea irresistible across different franchises that we have enjoyed through the years. For example, in The Matrix, in The Matrix, humans were plugged into some sort of like a digital prison, living ordinary lives inside an illusion, and our real bodies are actually sleeping in pods, being farmed by some sort of AI who actually needs our energy to basically progress. We've seen that also in a more, let's say, humanistic way in The Truman Show. Remember The Truman Show with Jim Carrey? A man is raised since birth inside a film set, a TV set, and his hometown, his job, his friends, every single one surrounding him is actually an actor. It's a decoy planted there to actually build stories and sell basically this TV show of The Truman Show. And so every sunrise, every sunset is basically a special effect, until one day he begins wondering, what if there was something else? And he decides he wants to escape this fake reality that he lives in. Another show you could watch is actually based on a movie from the 70s, and I think the movie was based on a book, I think, by Michael Crichton, which is Westworld. Both the book, the original movie, and the TV show recently, I think it was on HBO, which is kind of like this theme park where robots actually build a simulated reality where artificial beings awaken to the truth, which is that their entire lives have been scripted by humans who visit their world for entertainment. And then one day, these robots, these artificial beings, actually they race, they stage a revolution because they want to, earn freedom. And one final reference of movies or TV shows actually talking about the simulation hypothesis is actually one of the best ones in recent years, which is an episode of Black Mirror, the famous the British TV show called San Junipero. I really recommend this episode to you. I don't want to say too much about it. It's about the simulation hypothesis, a very beautiful story, and I don't want to do any spoilers in case you haven't seen it. But again, it deals with this idea of life inside a bubble and what happens when that life basically ends. It's a fantastic story. You should definitely check out as with any other episode of Black Mirror, which is an amazing TV show. So again, each one of these stories is different, but all question the same underlying principle, which is, how do you know what is real? If everything feels real, does it mean it is real? Because, for example, let's look at a video game. There's studies about video games who actually say that in the context of a video game, whenever we play a game, the emotions we feel inside the game have the same flavor and the same intensity as the emotion we would feel in the real world, but by this phenomenon called suspension of disbelief. So in other words, whenever they kill you in Call of Duty and whenever you have a lover in GTA or something like this, the reality you're watching is of course fake. It's actually pixels moving on a screen, but the emotions and the neurotransmitters in your brain are actually the same ones that you would get if you were experiencing that in the real world. And I know that really well because, again, I have spent the last decades of my life actually building worlds so detailed, so immersive, that of course at some point people actually give up and they stop believing that they are in a simulation. They just enjoy it and they just spend there a significant part of their life. I remember an anecdote. I used to be a professor of game design, and of course I had students who I was teaching them game design. And this was the years of World of Warcraft, if you remember the game World of Warcraft. And then one of my students was actually a huge fan of World of Warcraft. And I said, how many hours have you played? And he said, he looked it up and he said, 1,600 hours. And I said, whoa, that's a lot of hours, you know. Typically, your story video game lasts maybe 60 hours, 80 hours. So this guy has spent 1,600 hours. And I said, that's a lot of hours. And he answered to me, this year. And I was like, what? And so that means that he was actually spending 4 hours a day, every day, inside World of Warcraft. So at what point is this an exercise of escapism and immersion? And at what point this becomes your new reality? You know, I asked the guy, why do you do it? And he was like, because it's more fun than my real life. And, you know, that's a compelling thought, you know. So again, when I saw that, I realized something, which is we don't just escape into these worlds, we believe in them. We build identities, friendships, even love stories inside lines of code. And we keep creating these virtual realities because deep down, we don't care if reality is real or not. What we want is the experience. What we want is a fulfilling life full of interesting things to do. So if that life is actually simulation, or if that life is our real life, which is a simulation, that doesn't really matter to us, because we're in this state of immersion of a reality that could be fake and it could be real, and we wouldn't even notice. So again, maybe the act of creation itself, whether it's art or film or software, it's a quiet attempt to imitate what actually is happening in our world, which is our world being some sort of virtual ecosystem, a virtual reality that has been created by some sort of creator. This movement of the simulation hypothesis has gained a lot of thrust in the last 10 years or so, because the modern prophets of this idea, they're not philosophers, they're not priests, they're actually technologists. A lot of really high-end technologists living among us in this generation are actually proponents and believers of the simulation hypothesis. I was talking before about Nick Bostrom, Elon Musk, the owner of Tesla and many other companies. He's a believer of the simulation hypothesis, and he thinks that the likelihood of us actually being in a reality that's not simulated is very low. He believes actually the vast majority of probabilities are actually that we are inside a simulation. Even the famous physicist Neil deGrasse Tyson believes the same way, that we could very well be in some sort of simulated environment. And in an interview, he was quoted as saying that he thinks the possibility of reality being simulated is at least 50-50, if not higher. This was even mentioned by the late Stephen Hawking. So again, with all this, what we need to understand is that a lot of people who in recent years are, thinkers and engineers and scientists, etc., they're looking at this very, very seriously. And these are not people who wear robes or carry scriptures. This is people who write codes, who build rockets, and who fund AI labs. So they know technology inside out. And these same people are saying, hey, what if reality was actually not real? So again, if you listen carefully, you're going to notice something almost spiritual in their words. They speak about creators, they speak about the limits of computation, about escaping this world into a higher one. It's beginning to sound less like engineering and more like a prophecy of sorts. These people, these technologies, they're our new theologians, and their cathedral is not made of stone, but actually made of silicon. So really, we reach now the core of the question, which is, okay, can we prove that we're living inside a simulation? Or the opposite, can we prove that reality is real? Of course, that's actually the core of the discussion. And you'll be surprised to know that actually there's people thinking about this really hard, of saying, okay, let's imagine we are in simulation. What would be sufficient proof for us to know that this is a simulated world, or the other way around? So there's different ways by which scientists are actually targeting this question, because it's actually a worthwhile question of saying, okay, how do we know, or how will we prove that we are inside a simulation? The same way, if we say, hey, how do we prove that there's life outside Earth? Well, the day we find a microbe in a different planet, yada yada, same thing here. What is the proof required for us to prove that we're inside a simulation? So I'm gonna share with you 3 proofs that actually have been exposed, have been presented. Of course, none of them has been proven yet, but these are methods for us to prove if we are inside a simulation or not. The first proof is actually what's called the pixel theory. This is conceptually very, very simple. Imagine that you zoom into your computer screen. No matter how smooth the picture is, at some point you're going to hit the pixels, the smallest dots of color. And that happens everywhere. In any technological construct, there's this sense of resolution. What is the sample size? So if reality is not real, there should be some signs of resolution, So basically, the idea is that physicists, they wonder that if the universe is actually simulated, when we zoom in far enough to the smallest size of atoms and quarks and, that kind of stuff, does space itself stop being continuous? Is there a moment in which we will see the pixel size of the universe? Do you get the idea? So again, this kind of train of thought, the way they're doing this is they're looking for clues in cosmic rays, which are, high energy particles that zip through space, because their theory is that if space is actually truly pixelated, it has pixels, it has a resolution, those particles, they would not move perfectly smoothly. They would show some sort of tiny repeating distortions. The same way, if you light a pixel and then you light the next, there's a small discontinuity because of the resolution of the individual pixels. So same thing in a digital photo, when you zoom in too much, right? You begin seeing the sample size. Again, so far, no pattern, no pixel has been found in the universe, but basically there are scientists who are always on the lookout of this idea of a grid, this idea of some sort of structure, which is the structure of the representation of the universe. And they're trying to prove this idea that the universe has a resolution and that basically somebody then has designed it that way. Again, I told you I'm going to share three methods to prove this. This is the first one. Now let's go to the second one. The second one is called the quantum rendering theory. It sounds kind of like science fiction, but actually relies on quantum physics. Basically, the idea is that particles, as we know from quantum mechanics, they don't exist as things until they're measured, because of the duality in physics. So they sit in a haze of probability, a cloud of maybes, until the moment we observe them, and then that cloud collapses into one specific result, which is actually our observation, So basically, some scientists think that looks suspicious, because that idea that only when we look at reality settles in one state, it's actually a little bit like what video games do. If you think about a video game, when you play, the game does not render the entire world at once. It only renders what's in front of your eyes, because this way it saves memory, it saves power, and it focuses on what the player is actually viewing. So the proponents of this theory, of quantum rendering theory, what they say is that basically the universe could be doing actually the same, that reality only loads when consciousness looks at that reality. And that's the principle of quantum mechanics, that when we observe something, that particle, that individual element actually collapses into a specific state. That could be a form of rendering done by this creator of our universe. The idea that would be that observation is not a passive phenomenon, but observation, it's actually the way that we render the universe so that we can see something in this simulation, And then the last and the third scientific proof that the universe could be a simulation is called the holographic principle. In the holographic principle, this comes from theoretical physics, and the idea is surprisingly simple. Get a credit card, or even a CD. If you have one of those old CDs, if you look at a credit card and you put a little bit like this sloped, you're going to see it has some sort of like a hologram with a logo of the company of the credit card, and it looks three-dimensional, but actually we know perfectly well that this is actually a 2D image. The hologram is actually a 2D image that has been stored in the flat surface of the card. So now scale that idea of a hologram, so something that has depth but it's actually flat, to the scale of the universe. Some physicists, they do believe that our entire three-dimensional reality might actually be encoded in a two-dimensional cosmic boundary, a kind of like a surface that surrounds the universe. Imagine the whole universe. Imagine a balloon. You inflate that balloon, so there's a surface. Imagine that surface was actually holographic. And so everything we experience, the stars, planets, you, me, everything could be a projection of information from that distant surface onto us. If that's true, the idea is that the universe is not really a thing. It's information being processed in a very, very advanced display that, of course, with a technology far superior than anything that we may understand. So again, these three ideas, the idea, as I said before, of the pixel theory, the quantum rendering theory, and this idea of the holographic principle, sure, they may sound crazy, but they come from serious scientists. I mean, there's actually PhD grade scientists actually looking at this and thinking, hey, again, not so much are we living inside a simulation, but more the meta question, which is, okay, let's assume we lived inside a simulation. How do we prove it? Or how do we disprove it? Because, science advances this way, by actually proving or disproving hypotheses, and by doing this, actually expanding our knowledge of the world around us. But actually, this problem that seems very new, this problem of the simulation hypothesis, is actually very old. Many people have been thinking about this in the past, and basically the underlying idea is always the same, which is, if the universe is simulated, someone or something is running this simulation. And that leads us straight to the oldest question, which is one that has been puzzling humanity for the last 5,000 years, which is, why does the programmer or creator allow suffering? Why doesn't he intervene to actually guide our universe or steer that universe in a certain direction? If this world has a creator, a programmer, a simulation, why the pain, the war, the hunger, the death? Why not patch it? If this was a computer code, why not patch? Why not do a new version of this universe in which hunger does not exist anymore, for example? And again, this is nothing new. Okay, the first enunciation of this question was actually done by the philosopher Epicurus, who asked this over 2,000 years ago, which is, let's say we call this creator of a universe God. And I know I'm provoking you, but we'll get there later in the video. Let's say we call this creator of our universe, of this simulation hypothesis, a God. It doesn't need to be a God. It could be a programmer. It could be some sort of alien entity, whatever. But the idea is, okay, if this God can stop evil, but chooses not to do so, why? Why? Why did he create something which actually is imperfect? So is this creator good if he allows a world to actually be evil? If we move forward to the medieval ages, Thomas Aquinas actually argued that evil needs to exist in our world because this is the way for us to have free will. In other words, if everything was patched in real time, the code of the universe was patched in real time to only allow basically good things to happen, where is our free will? Our free will requires us to be able to do good and to do bad, and that's why this programmer cannot intervene, because if he intervened, he would actually be curbing our free will. Because think about this, a closed, perfect simulation, like some sort of a fish tank where everybody was happy, sure, everybody would be happy, but it would be sterile as well. No choice, no risk, no growth, no benefit, no loss. So the flaws in the design of our universe by this programmer, they may be deliberate, and the pain intentional, because that's the way for him, this creator, programmer, whatever you want to call it, to actually make us strive for greatness, make us work. Maybe that's the point of the simulation. The point of the simulation is not to make us happy, but to see how we react to complicated environments, how we react to pain and suffering and discomfort. So I want to now talk about the glitches, these moments that make us doubt of everything and make us seriously consider that we may be, after all, inside a simulation. You know, moments in life in which coincidences are too perfect that something happens and you go like, what? Or the dreams that seem too real. I mean, how many times have you had a dream that actually was telling you something about your real life, and then you wake up and the day after you're actually checking if that thing in your dream was real or not? Kind of like, how can I in my dream have seen this thing that actually will happen the day after in my real life? Or of course, as I was saying, the deja vus. Let me tell you my story about Hong Kong that I was talking about before. You know, again, I landed in Hong Kong and I was staying in Kowloon, which is kind of like mainland China side of Hong Kong. You know, and I was actually walking through a promenade, which is called the Avenue of Stars, if I remember correctly, seeing the Hong Kong skyline. And I was with my wife, and for 10 minutes I was really scared, and I'm not kidding, because I was telling her all the time, I have been here, I have been here. I remember this place specifically. And you know, she was like, it cannot be. We have never been to China. So again, these moments are moments in which somehow we have some sort of like a short circuit in our brain. Science says that that's what deja vus are. Some sort of a short circuit of neurons actually making a connection that isn't there in our memory. And of course, because of this false positive, we get this feeling that we remember something of things that actually never happened in our life. It's kind of like a hiccup in our temporal lobe of our brain, where recognition and the recollection of our memories get out of sync. Basically, our brain's familiarity signal fires without a real memory attached. So again, I am in a place. It's not that I remember the place, is that I get the trigger in my brain of I remember. So I get the feeling that I remember this place just because my brain is telling me, oh yeah, I'm remembering. You see, that's how it works. It's a false alarm. It's a natural echo. But in those instances, and we have all been there, we have all been through this kind of experience with dreams, with deja vus, and with coincidences, it really does feel weird. It does feel cosmic, like reality was reloaded, and it was reloaded on that same scene twice, and for some reason it feels really, really wrong. So yeah, sure, you can believe this is just biology and it's just your neurons acting funny, or maybe it's a hack of the system. It's a tiny flicker in the code, a reminder that this may not be the first time that we have played this level, the first time that we have been to this place. And the same thing happens with our dreams, those hyper-real nights that I was saying before, where we see something that will happen in the future, or we meet people we have never met before. Neuroscientists, they say dreams are just a mode of memory cleanup. You know, that we sleep, actually our brain performs kind of like maintenance mode of our brain and our memories, and then because of that cleanup of our memories, dreams actually arise. But what if this was not really true? What if these were basically background processes of the simulation while you're logged out? You know, when you're asleep, they do some sort of a maintenance on your code, on your brain, whoever is actually running this simulation. Maybe the paranormal, maybe the ghosts, maybe the impossible, maybe the mystical are just the system's debug messages firing in our brain. But here comes the twist. I told you at the beginning of the video that at the end I will tell you who's behind this simulation. And this is really the question, right? Who built this? Let's imagine we are in a simulation. Who built this simulation? Who's been hiding behind the curtain, actually running this show that we all live in? And really, I've said this before, this simulation hypothesis is not new at all. It's the same story humanity has always been telling itself. The only thing is that we're giving it a new name, and this new name is simulation hypothesis, and this new name is code. But if you think about it, since man left the cave, 10,000 years ago, we have all believed there was somebody actually ruling the universe, ruling our lives, but we call that God. So really, this idea of the simulation hypothesis is nothing but a rehash of the idea of religion. You know, that there's a higher intelligence that this higher intelligence, call it Yahweh, call it God, call it Allah, call it whatever you want, it created the universe, it set the rules of the universe, and it just lets it flow. It watches over us, but it doesn't intervene. If you think about it, what Elon Musk is saying and what the Bible says is not that different. It's actually the same thing. So what I'm trying to say is that this new principle that has been rehashed as technology or maybe even science fiction, really, you know what? It's theology with a new outfit. We just changed the names. What we called God 10 centuries ago, now we call it the programmer. What we called the creation and the Genesis, we now call it the simulation. And what we called prayer back in the day, now it's debugging. You see, it's the same impulse, we're just giving it new clothing. Here's the twist that I promised you in the beginning. Every era has always faced the same problem and the same issue, which is the issue of mortality and the issue of meaning, which is what happens when we die? And is this all there is? When I'm gone, will there be anything left? And basically, we have given answers which are the proper answer to every era to this same question, which is a question that has no answer, because the only way to find out the answer to that question is to die and see if there's something else. And of course, we will all go through that at some point in our life. So this is the twist I really promised, which is the real author of this simulation hypothesis is not a programmer. No, Elon Musk is wrong. There is no programmer. And it's not God either, as they said in the medieval ages. And, a lot of people, of course, still do believe in God, and that's perfectly fine. No. You know who's the creator of this simulation hypothesis? Us. That's the idea. Like, the idea is that we are the ones who need this higher powers, because, again, we need to find an explanation to the eternal question of what happens when we die, and is this all there is? We cannot stand a universe that has no purpose, a naturalistic universe where things are just rules of nature and life emerged on Earth just because of a statistical combination of factors of temperature and molecules and yada, yada, yada. Many of us, we cannot stand this idea that the universe does not have a purpose, it does not have a reason to exist. The universe just being a natural phenomenon. So we write an explanation. And the explanation changes through the years and through the centuries, but it's actually always the same explanation, which is that behind every religion, behind every myth, behind every cosmology, and now behind the simulation hypothesis, there's the same human fingerprint, which is the need to believe that somebody is in control. So, who is behind the simulation? We are. We may never know if this is the base reality that we're living in, or if we are in some sort of code simulation. The only way, as I said, to know this is to die and find out, okay, what happens after. Of course, none of us is coming back alive from that moment, and that's the reason why we don't know the answer. But maybe the simulation hypothesis in the most recent formula done by Elon Musk and Bostrom and these kind of people was never about the universe, and it was never about who is in control. It was more about us, about our fear of randomness, our hunger for meaning. Every generation needs to build new gods. And with the tools every generation understands. So back in the day it was Bibles, and then later it was maybe science, and now we do have a deeper understanding of the universe, and of course we control everything from, quantum mechanics to sending rockets to the moon or whatever. But the problem is that even with all the firepower of science, we're still not sure of what is the purpose of this world. Why are we here? What are we supposed to do? And what happens when we died? So, of course, whether this world was dreamt, written, or rendered, the meaning of this world is something we keep wondering. What is the meaning of this place? Because for us, pain feels real, love feels real, the sense of wonder feels real. So again, if this is a simulation, it's a very good one, and it's the most beautiful one that we could ever imagine. And the purpose of this game, if this world is actually a game, is to play it well, because again, this is not about the programmers. It's about what we do with the time we have been given in this world. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Decode. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so that we can keep growing, and see you on the next episode of Decode. Bye.